Right.
Hey guys, how are you?
Good.
Fine, thank you very much.
Good to have you here digging into the topic of transformational technologies that's really driving the next wave of innovation in climate tech. So before we get started, just for context, let me just go around and have each other, y'all introduce yourselves. We'll start with Jamey.
Yeah, so I'm Jamey Butcher. I'm Chemonics International CEO. My third year. Chemonics, maybe you haven't heard of us, we're working in nearly 100 countries around the world, everywhere from crisis environments to frontier and emerging economies. 5,000 colleagues, 90% or more of whom are local professionals, some of the most talented individuals available to do socioeconomic, environmentally sustainable work and create solutions that lead to lasting change in the communities where we're at.
Great, it's great to have your perspective here. And then we have Philipp.
Yeah, so my name is Philipp Gruener. I'm a senior partner and head of direct tech at Decisive Capital Management. We are a European-based investor from Geneva, and within our venture investments, we particularly focus on what you would call deep tech and frontier tech. And most of all, I'm super proud that one of our portfolio companies is actually a finalist today. So I'm already looking forward to that.
Great, welcome Philipp. Bill, welcome.
Hi, Bill Ty. I'm primarily an angel investor, kiteboarder, and co-creator of the contests that we have today.
Awesome. You saw a little bit about Bill earlier. So let me kickstart by saying that we've seen a proliferation of climate tech and also a proliferation of investors investing in the space as well. So thinking about tech themes, what are some of the big themes that you're really excited about? So let me go backwards and start with Bill.
The stuff I'm excited about is primarily around communities or marketplaces to solve problems with collective action. Because I think that's probably the big change in this era compared to, kind of the last big attempt at kind of climate tech stuff in the 90s. There was a big wave of capital investment in things like solar panels and hardware, but even if you could make those products, it didn't necessarily produce any real action. I mean, those were kind of the enabling tools. So I think we're at a point now where there's enough awareness and an ability to stitch people's economic interests together en masse to do things like carbon marketplaces or attempts at mass action to clean up the plastic in the ocean. So kind of marketplace-related things.
Yeah, and we've certainly seen a number of those companies within the XTC family. Great. I'm actually going to hop over to Jamey. A couple of things that you're excited about.
Yeah, it's hard for me to say I'm excited about one technology or another. What I get excited about is the way in which technologies are blended at the community level to create solutions that are meaningful for those communities. And I agree with Bill. There's a proliferation of not only technology, but also an awareness that's growing about the needs of our planet, that we're, inextricably linked, and the problems that are happening here and the other side of the world are connected, and technology is one of the greatest tools we have at our disposal to really address many of the intractable challenges that are happening now and in our future. And so when we use technology, it's really in a locally adaptive way, and in a way that's meaningful to all of the actors and the organizations and people involved.
Great, and certainly I think having a forum like this really brings folks together, right? Raising the awareness and potentially facilitating strategic partnerships, investments in order to connect the dots and make that happen. And Philipp, from your perspective?
What I'm excited most about is when technology creates a win-win for the environment and the customer alike. So for example, one concrete, and concrete no pun intended, example is the construction space, where I think there's a huge challenge when it comes to CO2 emissions.
Yep.
But at the same time, it won't go away, right? So people will still need housing, there will be more people, we have to renovate. So this doesn't go away, and let's rather face it early on. And what I see there is that there's, for example, in cement production, there's, and it's quite astonishing that for every metric ton of cement that you produce, you release an equal amount of CO2 into the air. So we're talking about 9 billion metric tons per year. And just to put that into perspective, if a company tackles this problem, they tackle 8% of all the CO2 emissions annually. And if only cement production would be like a country, they would be the third largest polluter right now, up there with passenger cars. So whoever can fix this, and there are startups that can do it, they lower the footprint, and they even can recapture the carbon, bring it into the product and make it more robust, more anti-fragile. This is something where I think everyone takes a win away.
Yeah, so let me double click on that, and we're getting a little bit into policy and standardization. I think measuring impact is always on our minds as operators and also as you investors. What are some of the things that you're looking at, or some of the key metrics when you think about measurement? Yeah. Bill? Oh, or Jamey, we were about to say something.
So it's not so much measurement, but I think the idea of standardization obviously matters a lot.
Yeah.
And I spent a lot of time, so my background, I started as a chip designer and it kind of went up the stack to equipment, to telco networks, user interface, data science, and blockchain. And so when I look at the waves of things that have happened in the past, it's not until there are some standards set that you can drive very high economies of scale. You know, whether it was the PC standardization and the x86 standardization that allowed guys like Bill Gates to have, you know, a massive company in Microsoft, to, you know, the network era was interesting in that as communications networks started, there were many, many small sub-networks that did not talk to each other, whether they were, you know, Unix networks or Novell networks or whatever it was. And it wasn't until you could kind of tie all those things together that you had mass adoption that allowed scaling. And I think we're in a world today where, back on the theme of marketplaces to enable things, if you look at what's happening in blockchain today, because now there's kind of a common way, a reference standard to account for identity and units of anything that are attached to this backbone. You know, it's kind of like in the internet, you had words that could drop into that information superhighway and independent of the kind of road, pop out the other side, but they all had to be interoperable. And we're now finally at a stage where blockchain stuff and cryptocurrency stuff, despite the fall in the market today and yesterday, you know, you can use a Bitcoin as an example. It has an address and identity of a coin. You can drop it in, and it comes out the other side, and you know it came out, right? So I think because we have that kind of a fabric now, there's an ability to have standardization that will allow massive scaling of the solutions that pop up. And we're going to have those at some point in carbon credit markets and other ways to measure ESG. I'm working on a project with the New York Stock Exchange, for example, where it's very clear that the investors now care when they direct their money from the big funds where it's going. And so with the New York Stock Exchange, we may be able to produce some set of standards around the ESG measurement where there's like a little bit of a branding and a label on every single company that has something good for this planet, you know, which is kind of cool. So I didn't really answer your question, but it's what's happening.
No, always great to hear about your work in this area. And Philipp, you work for a wealth advisory firm and you invest money for big families. And talk to me about the changing trends of how they think about putting money in innovations and startups that can yield positive impact as well as have the potential to become big businesses. Like, what is that shift?
So perhaps first of all, I think just from an investor perspective, I think what I was missing the last couple of years was more visionary investors with a longer time horizon. I think, and then I will go back to the second part of the question, I promise. I think over the last couple of years with the easy money, there was a lot of what I would call momentum investing in private markets, right? And LPs, they get a wrong impression of IRRs and time to liquidity over that time. And I think it hurts especially deep tech and like frontier tech kind of companies because they are the ones that take the longest to play out. So there, I think funding went a bit in the wrong direction. And as you said, we manage family money, most of them with entrepreneurial background, so they are long-term focused, but I also see incubators, I see public-private partnerships, so they can fill this spot. And I think it's important, and although the last couple of months were probably painful for some, in the end I think it helped, because investors are getting back to basics now, reconsidering, and this I think will prove positive for the space.
Yeah, one more question for you. How do you think about measurement as you're looking at these investments? I know it's not a hard and fast rule, but do you have a framework?
Yeah, so we have a framework, and obviously, like probably pretty comparable to other impact investors. But what I'm considering most right now when I see business models is how will customers adapt to them. So this to me is the main challenge, because in the end it's not like you build it and they will come. You have a great product, it's great for the environment, but still nobody's going to buy it. And I think, especially in deep tech, to make it worthwhile for the company and the investors, at one point in time you have to go truly global. And this means, for example, if you're B2C, you will face a regular customer, like with a short attention span, cost conscious, frightened of innovation. So how do you pursue this customer if, for example, you're not competitive on price and if your product quality isn't a fit yet? So I think there governments have to step in and create incentives. And this is also like, it's a go-to-market question, but this is one that I'm focusing on right now most.
And there are many more levers, right? As we see all these innovative companies who presenting today, especially many of the entrepreneurs in the audience, it's all about go-to-market and what are some of the levers that we can pull to accelerate that. And I want to echo back to our first panel today, Professor Colin. What he said was, meet them where they are. And also, don't jam things down people's throat. So tying that to go-to-market, how do we unlock the bottleneck, the friction to new technology adoption? Jamey?
Yeah, no, I think it's a tricky question. It has to start at a community level with the design. And all of you know this, user experience designing, human-centered design has to happen at the community level, but then the trick is when you find something that fits and works, how do you scale it to the global need? So we're working, for instance, with HIV positive people in Malawi and Lake Malawi that have to take blood samples from a remote island or a remote space into a lab setting, and we're using drones. We've had to work in the environment there to get line of sight approval and things like that. But it's all done at a local level with community members, with leaders adopting that technology to the need. And our outcome is how many people know their HIV status, how many are receiving high-quality drugs, and how many people have suppressed viral loads so their families and they can be safe. On the other hand, we're working in Ethiopia delivering those same drugs and taking those same lab samples by camel in some cases, from drones to dromedaries. And it's really adapting to the needs of that community. And what we talk about all of the time, and that's just one example of many where we're using drone technology, in this case solar power and others, satellite imagery. How do you take those solutions and then get them to the scale of the people that need them? In the case of HIV, it's 27 million people in sub-Saharan Africa. And really, I think that's where we come back to standards, and we come back to win-win economic incentives that allow us to proliferate these solutions across the audience and the population that need them.
Yeah, I think as the CEO of a leading global development firm is really looking at connecting dots, taking the innovation that's born maybe here or there, but taking and implementing down to the community level and actually impact the people, everyday people. It's very admiring. Mm-hmm.
Well, and as I said, Chemonics, the vast majority of our colleagues are local professionals that are making change happen in those communities. And I think there's also a perception gap where the investment community may look at countries with more skepticism than they deserve. Mm-hmm. And frankly, I think there are opportunities out there to make money and do good and use the technologies and the advances that are available here and throughout this area of the world. to really make change happen. And we have to get over that perception gap as well. And I think through a local lens, some of the people we work with are heroic, extraordinary professionals that can help that translation happen.
And going to Bill, as someone who's been investing in over 3 decades and have taken companies like Zoom as a baby little seed, your first check, to the company today, you know about scaling and you know about company building. Secret sauce.
Yeah, so actually, life can be pretty simple. I think I think people that have worked with me as an investor, or if I'm involved in your companies, where I do see some folks here that I've backed, they'll hear me repeat the same thing over and over and over, which is there are only a couple things you have to do. Luck's got to hit you in the head with a 2x4 in terms of the market, but what you actually do is very simple, which is you find a use case that you lower the friction to, and then you design it for replicability, and you build the scale. So it can scale, right? So lower friction, make it replicable, make it scalable. That's all you have to do. Right, so if you look at Canva or Zoom or Wish or Dapper Labs or Treasure Data that I started, that's all I ever said to my teams. Find a use case. Make it easier for people to get to. So lower the friction to that use case, make it replicable, and build it to scale, and it worked every time. So now that doesn't apply to actually kind of applies to every business, in reality. So just remember that. If you're going to pitch me, that's kind of what I'm thinking, all right? So every time someone's telling me what they're doing, I'm just thinking, well, did they find something that could explode if they lower the friction? And is the team going forward in time to do it so that if it does hit that flash point, that it's bump, 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 and then the back end goes, right? And if you get those 3, you're going to be more capital efficient than others that are not. And you got a shot at winning.
And it's catching the wave and riding that wave at the right moment. Philipp, bottlenecks to scaling, and what are some of your 1, 2, 3 tips?
So perhaps doubling down on what Bill said, I always say it's exciting to be in a sprint race, but it's even better if you start at the 20-meter mark, or how many feet this are. Sorry, I'm from Europe. But I think if you, and we talked about Africa, right? I think if you are now an entrepreneur, perhaps coming back, having experience in the valley, and then you go back to your roots, you go back to a continent like Africa, there you will meet a lot of natural demand for your tech business models, right? So you have a super young population there, a lot of population growth, and you have a lot of societies that are mobile first. So they are waiting for innovation to happen, especially decentralized. And if those entrepreneurs, they come back with money, network, experience, I think that's a match made in heaven. So this is why we are looking at opportunities there. And like one example is a company called Jamey. They raised their Series A recently, and they plan to do a super app like WeChat, right? Based on Web3 and the crypto space. And what's exciting is they focus only in the first step on people younger than 30. And with that, astonishingly, they already cover 2/3 of the sub-Saharan population. Right? So that's already a huge addressable market only if you focus on the most attractive customer segment. And then if you talk about crypto, they focus on a population that's the 3rd fastest growing crypto geography in the world. So this is what I mean with starting 20 meters in front. And this is why, for example, the continent is a pretty exciting opportunity.
Last question, rapid answers. Jamey, you're perhaps one of the largest contractor for USAID, right? Deploying and taking these innovations to market. If their startup companies was looking to partner with you to get their innovations to the ground, how do they reach you?
Yeah, no, we work with startup companies all of the time. Honestly, there's innovation and technology being adapted in a wide variety of ways all over the world. We just had a solar panel project in Lebanon where we were providing essential services through solar energy in a country that's been crushed with refugee influx and economic downturn. And we found that they were adapting the solar technology for welding, solar energy to do welding to fix water leakage in farm settings, because it was the problem that they had to work through. So I think there are lots of innovations. To me, it's design locally, pay attention to the enabling environment where you're working, and then don't treat it like a charity. Figure out the win-win incentives so that you can address the populations around the world that need the benefit of that breakthrough.
Find out what the right business model to take that great idea and implement them widely and create the impact. Hey, thanks guys. Great conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victoria.